The college basketball world was rocked Tuesday by the news that Alabama star freshman Brandon Miller brought the gun used to kill 23-year-old mother Jamea Jonas Harris on January 15th, with Nate Oats seemingly being dismissive of the gravity of the situation in his initial press conference. This is a difficult topic to lead today's show with. We want to honor the victim and discuss how and why these incidents continue to happen in our beloved sport.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up? Welcome to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Andy Patton, and today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. All right, joined today by Leaf Tulane Leaf. We're going to talk about Texas and Marquette. They had big wins on Tuesday evening. We're going to take a look at what those losses mean for Iowa State and Creighton. We're also going to close the show with some upset picks for the rest of the week and the weekend. But we got to lead today's show with the disturbing revelation that came out on Tuesday that the January 15th murder of Jamea Jonas Harris, which was committed by former Alabama forward Darius Miles and his friend Michael Davis. They're the two being charged. But we found out that Alabama freshman Jalen Bradley and Brandon Miller were both involved in this event. Reports indicate, for anybody who missed this story, it was a huge story on Tuesday. I'm sure many of you listening have kind of already heard about this, but for anybody who it's new to, Miller received a text from Miles in the late evening on January 15th to bring Miles's gun to him, which was located in Miller's car. So Miller at 1:45 in the morning left, brought Darius Miles his gun, helped block in, and this is the part of the story that is, I feel, a little unexplored, underdeveloped here. It sounds like Miller and Bradley used their cars to prevent the victims from getting out of the spot that they were parked. Miles loaded the gun, gave it to Davis. Davis went up to the car. Shots were fired. I believe 11 total shots were fired. And this is not some remote area, for the record. This was in downtown Tuscaloosa that this happened. Unfortunately, Harris passed away on the scene. Shots were returned. Davis was hit, and Brandon Miller's car was hit. This was all new information discovered on Tuesday. Nate Oats had a press conference where this question was kind of presented to him about this information. I think it's fair to say that he didn't handle the initial press conference particularly well. He did come back later in the day and kind of clarify some of his comments and apologize for some of his comments coming off a little bit misinformed, I guess is one way to put it. Callous would be another way to put it. Kind of said that Miller was at the wrong place at the wrong time, which I think is a bit of a exaggeration or a bit of a kind of light way to put what actually happened here. There's obviously a lot to unpack here. I think it is important to note that the Tuscaloosa Police Department did not charge Miller or Bradley with a crime. They stated that there was no evidence to charge them of a crime, that they are basically bystanders and witnesses more than they are actively involved in the crime. I do think that that is important to note. Whether that absolves Miller of any punishment whatsoever is kind of a question that I want to talk about with you, Leaf, but it is an important detail of the story. I think bringing a loaded gun to a teammate at 1:45 in the morning is a bad idea. It is a bad judgment call, and it directly led to somebody losing their life. I don't think there is really any other way to look at this situation and not feel like that is the reality of the situation. Miller could have made any other choice here. He could have made the choice to just text back no and not do it. He could have driven to pick up Miles without bringing the weapon and tried to convince him to come home. He could have told somebody. He could have ignored the text. All of those would have been preferable options to what he chose to do. I do not believe this is a wrong place at the wrong time situation. I also understand that Miller was not charged with a crime and that is a factor in this conversation. But Leaf, kind of what I want to talk about here, the most important thing here, I think, want to make sure we get this out of the way very clearly. The most important thing here is justice for Harris and her family. This is a 23-year-old mother of a 5-year-old kid who lost her life for no reason. A dumb fight in front of a bar in the middle of the night. Horrifying story. There's no other way to look at it. But I want to kind of figure out what this means for Miller, because he's clearly involved in a way that is much more significant than we initially thought. Him not being charged with a crime matters, but does it matter to the point where it shouldn't impact whether he plays the rest of the season for Alabama, a team that has, not just Final Four aspirations, but national championships aspirations, the number one team in the country for many, many weeks this season. My question to you, Leaf, do you think this should impact Miller's playing time for the rest of the season? Do you think that it will? And we can kind of talk about this later, what it means for his NBA aspirations as a guy who's expected to go in the top 10, potentially top 5 of the upcoming NBA draft.
Yeah, I did a podcast with Rafael Barlow last night, and we discussed the Brandon Miller situation at depth. So I'll say some of the prevailing thoughts that we discussed, and it's the matter of culpability. Maybe I'm just cynical, but if you see a guy getting a text at 1:45, we share the same thought about a gun. I think it's rarely going to be harmless at that time. Like it seems like that seems like a poor decision. And one statement that we didn't mention was DA Paula Whiteley told AL.com, there's nothing we could charge Miller with. And so what bothers me about this situation from an Alabama basketball perspective is when someone has 2 bullet dents in their car, and the police have already said there's nothing we could charge the guy with, and now it comes out, why wouldn't this situation be brought up earlier? And that's why, from a basketball standpoint, I imagine Brandon Miller will play and will not be penalized. Do I think that's accurate? Not particularly, and appropriate, I should say. Not particularly. I'm not thrilled by this. I mean, everyone's given the benefit of the doubt, but there's certain doubt that I cast toward the way this is being handled by both Nate Oats and the way that the police department in Alabama kept this under wraps to a degree that now it's so out of nowhere. You're talking about a star basketball player, but what's being swept under the rug is the real, more serious event, and that's the murder that happened. And it's crazy to say that we're talking about that rather than like the number 2 team in the nation, Alabama. And my take on it is that Nate Oats saying, "Oh, the whole situation is sad. We knew about that." That are 2 quotes. And then he says, Brandon hasn't been in any type of trouble, nor is he in any type of trouble in this case. Wrong spot at the wrong time. And then furthermore, he says, we've been fully cooperating with law enforcement the entire time, and the whole situation is sad, but I don't have control of what goes on out of practice. Like it felt like it was a scapegoat. So I don't think either Miller or Oats are truly on the hot seat. But my personal feelings about it is that it's been mishandled both by the police department for not bringing this out sooner and by Alabama saying we knew about that. Like, I'm not saying a slap on the wrist, like 2-game suspension or sooner, like when it happened would have been the right thing. But I feel like delaying it for a month and now bringing it up as if it could be a slap on the wrist is really certainly the wrong thing.
Yeah, and I mean, just the dismissiveness of the way that Oates talked about it. And again, he did apologize for this, but he basically made it sound like Miller's involvement was very kind of casual, and that it really downplayed the situation. And quite honestly, I thought was a bit offensive to the victim to make it sound like, oh, this is a sad situation, we prayed over it. Like, your players committed murder. I mean, there's not really any other way to look at it. And people can split hairs over Miller's involvement and whether he should be legally charged and all of that. But like, he had an active role in this, and Jalen Bradley's role is a little bit less clear at this point, but 3 of your players willingly showing up to the scene of a murder and not stopping it from happening, while one of them had an incredibly active role at Miles in doing it, is horrifying. There's not really another way. It's horrifying. And for Oates to basically say, we can't control what these guys do out of practice or out of the, when they're not on the court, that is not a good enough answer. It's not a good enough answer. I worked in college athletics for years. I've worked with coaches. I've worked with student athletes. And yeah, they're adults. You can't control every single thing that they do. But to use that as an excuse for, oh yeah, they went and did this, just feels really, like I said, callous to me. Of like, yeah, maybe you can't control everything they do, but you can probably control if they do this. Or if you can't, then your ability to do your job is in question for me. This is part of your job. Part of your job, I mean, it's not specifically in the job description of prevent your players from committing heinous crimes, but it's kind of implied that you should be able to do that. And we talked about the kind of Miller aspect of it all, but I'm curious from a Nate Oats perspective, it seems very unlikely that he is going to be punished. But at what point do you question his ability to have a leadership role. I mean, because his ability to coach is not in question. That's fine. He's very good at that. Whatever, cool. Part of your job is to develop young men. Like, that's part of the job. And you have to wonder if he's failing at that, if this is the situation two of his freshmen find themselves in, where they don't have the ability to make the correct decision. I mean, not even close. They make the worst possible decision in this situation. To me, at some point, and this is beyond that point, and we're going to talk on a future episode, I'm going to talk about the New Mexico State situation and what's going on there. They're not entirely related, although they have some similarities, and the coaching staff there has been, removed. But at what point do you look at a coach and say, hey, you clearly don't have enough control of your team here if this is the kind of stuff that's happening? Again, I don't think he's going to get fired, but it's got to put a pretty big stain on his reputation as a leader of young men right now.
Yeah, this is a take that I think sports and social media makes more prevalent than it should be. Yeah. But winning has cured all. And if Alabama, a sports crazy school, has a guy that they're willing to give this huge extension to, and they're on top of the world in basketball now, and football, is their staple, and they're number one in the March Madness reveal, like the mock thing last Saturday. I just don't think there's a way they're going to ruin with that. Like, it would take an enormous reaction from the public. Which, there's a reaction, but I'm saying overbearing, enormous reaction from the public to really have Oats in danger and be in the hot seat. And I think there's an argument to be made that that's fair for him not to lose his job because he had no personal culpability. Right. But you are the figurehead of your program. It's not like the NBA, where the NBA is like the stars run the teams.
Right.
And I know there's owners, but the stars are the teams. In college basketball, Tom Izzo is Michigan State.
Right.
Like he is Alabama basketball. Brandon Miller will be there for 9 months and go to the NBA, presumably. Noah Clowney, same thing. And, this is a overbearing thing. So Rick Pitino was guilty in his crimes, was fired. But if you look at that relative to some of these other things that have happened sooner with these cheating scandals, Sean Miller, Book Richardson, all these things, were they guilty of cheating? Yes. Were they egregious? Not particularly, in the grand scheme of things. This is a horrible atrocity, but was he culpable? Not personally. Right. Does he bear some blame? Maybe. But I don't think he's going to lose his job because of personal culpability lacking.
Well, Leaf, it's not easy to transition out of this topic, but we're going to do our very best to transition out of this topic. I'm sure there will be much more conversation about Alabama, about Nate Oats, about Brandon Miller, about this, horrifying event and justice for Harris here. But we're going to transition out. We're going to talk about Tuesday's games. We're going to talk about Texas and Marquette, the wins that they had on Tuesday evening, and how far these teams could go in March. But before we do that, today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and we are so excited to talk about our new sportsbook partner for the Locked On Podcast Network, and that is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Maybe you're feeling a big win for the Warriors on the road against the Lakers this evening. Maybe you like the Pacers to cover an 8-point spread at home against Boston. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Leaf, segment 2 here, switching over to talk about Texas and Marquette, two teams that picked up massive wins on Tuesday evenings. We're going to talk about the two teams that won and the two teams that lost and kind of what their prospects look like as we get closer and closer to March Madness and the NCAA Tournament. Starting with the Longhorns, they absolutely blasted Iowa State 72-54 on Tuesday evening, 18-point victory over the Cyclones. Iowa State shot just under 43% from the field, 4 of 19 from deep. They had 16 turnovers and only 8 assists. That is what that defense can do to you. The guards, of course, were great for Texas. Hunter had 15. Jabari Rice had 15 off the bench. Marcus Carr had 13. The team shot 43% from deep, a little bit better from three than Iowa State shot from the field in this one. Really, really nice performance from Rodney Terry's team. And that's what I want to ask you, Leaf. We've seen this team continue to kind of defy the odds. They had a tragedy earlier in the year with Chris Beard and getting fired for his domestic violence case. And they have kind of rebounded from that in a significant way, continue to play really good basketball under Terry. Do you think, seeing them do this type of thing, do you think this is a Final Four team?
I certainly think they have a chance to be. I this weekend decided to write out notes on my contenders by eye test, not by resume, and they were one of the top 5. And I hadn't quite. I kind of had 1, 2, and 3 in order, and from like I did six schools, and I would say 4 through 6 could go any which way.
Sure.
That said, to answer that question candidly, yes. And one thing I'll say about them is they'll have to rebound well. Yeah. That's my concern. In every game that they've lost, they've been out rebounded by a significant margin, not just a rebound here or there, but they've like 8+ in all of their losses. They do have multiple scorers. They've got good guard play. They've got good depth. The ball gets a bit stagnant for my liking, but they find a way to move it in big moments. And then the other key that I have written down here is Tyrese Hunter's got to play like Tyrese Hunter is capable, and they need some interior scoring. And I think both of those fit each other. Like Dylan Dessou and Christian Bishop are both averaging give or take 7 a game and averaging like 4 rebounds and 3 rebounds respectively. I worry about playing a team that's big. And if you're playing a bigger team, like off the top of my head, who could be a 7 seed and they play them like Providence? Providence would be a really tough matchup for Texas because they're big, they play slow, they're good defensively. Texas is the better team, but my question is, can they score repeatedly without interior scoring? Because their shooting is not amazing. They do have the talent to be. And then the greater question that looms over them is they lost Chris Beard midseason. How well are they going to be coached? And this isn't fair to Rodney Terry, but that's the narrative that's going to be there. It's like, oh, Texas has a new coach. Can he coach them well and make the adjustments necessary? Because every team has to make adjustments in March Madness. And the parity this year really illustrates that, is that anyone can beat anyone, so you have to be well coached in this point. And I think that's why Kansas is getting so much applause, because Bill Self's adjusted the formula multiple times. Like they were down 17 points against Baylor, decided not to switch everything, just switch between McCullough and Harris, and they took away Baylor's guards, who combined for 42 in the first half to a very meager performance in the second. So to answer your question, I do think they're a Final Four contender. But I'm not terribly impressed by their win against Iowa State, because I think what they should do at home is blast Iowa State. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Iowa State, because they've now lost 4 of their last 5. Their only win in that stretch is at home against a good TCU team. Their losses, Texas, Kansas State, and then Oklahoma State and West Virginia. Again, there's pretty much no bad losses in the Big 12, but losing 4 out of 5 at any point against anybody is not going to help your resume. They're now 8-7 in Big 12 play. The latest bracketology still has them as a 3 seed. That has kind of been where they have been for a while. Starting to feel like they're not going to end up being on the 3 line. I'm curious your thoughts on potential seeding for Iowa State, and also if this is a team that you think could potentially turn the ship around here right before March and get on a run, or if they're kind of starting to show their true colors here.
I think a mix of both. I think they'll probably end up on the 4 line, maybe a 5 line if they continue to have a little bit of a tailspin. The Big 12, like you mentioned, is really, really good. So like the losses aren't bad. They're 8-9 against quad 1 teams. And some of those teams I think have fizzled out from their non-conference, and some of them have gotten better. Iowa State, to me, the issue is their defense is going to show up, but how is their offense going to supply insurance to their defense? Like Gabe Kalsher is a fine player, but he shouldn't be your top option. And in my opinion, he's their top option late in games. Like Caleb Grill comes flying off screens. You've got Taman Lipsey, who puts pressure on the rim. Your bigs are mostly there to rebound and get lobs. I think that it's an unsustainable recipe to advance far in a tournament. Can they win a game or 2? Absolutely. But I'm concerned about the longevity of that process. Like it's hard to be so reliant on one side of the ball. And that's the same thing for Tennessee is what we're seeing right now. I think both of them are going to end up being 4 seeds despite hot starts to the season because of their lack of offensive consistency.
Yep. Well, I want to move over to the big game in the Big East that happened on Tuesday. Shaka Smart and Marquette picked up a huge, somewhat controversial win over Creighton. 73-71 was the final score. There was a non-call for Baylor Shireman at the end of the game, caused some unhappiness from the Creighton bench and coaching staff. But this was a really, really nice vintage performance from Marquette's offense. Cam Jones had 19. Tyler Kolek had 18.6 assists. Iguodaro had 18 points. 3 guys, all balanced scoring attack. Creighton, meanwhile, had 15 turnovers. They also missed 18 threes. Their percentage from 3 wasn't terrible, but they missed 18 of them. Shireman was 3 of 11. Starting with kind of the Marquette aspect of it, they are now they were already in the driver's seat for the number 1 seed to finish, or the regular season championship in the Big East. Now it looks very likely that they are going to be the top team going into the Big East tournament, projected to finish 9th before the season for what it is worth. You've talked a lot, Leaf, about talented guard play as being a key for NCAA tournament runs. Marquette appears to have that. They are a very, very good, dynamic offensive team. They are a well-coached team by Shaka Smart. Do you believe, same question we asked about Texas, is this one of those teams that you see potentially making a Final Four run? If yes, why? If not, why not?
So it's fun. It's funny this is being asked because I have a group chat with my friends, and I long ago said Marquette's going to win the Big East, and I have the text here pulled up. Marquette's going to win the Big East, but I don't trust anyone in the Big East to advance far because they play kind of funky, finicky ball. And I'm taking out the trolling nature of our group chat.
Of course.
But the reason I don't think Marquette can make a Final Four, despite and this is from mid January 4th, so this is a while ago. Marquette isn't a contender because if you make Tyler Kolek a scorer and take away his facilitation, like UConn did, I think this is a really telling game. I think a lot of teams are going to watch this game when they play Marquette. And if you have an athletic defender, make Tyler Kolek a driver but not a facilitator, I think it makes it very difficult for them to reproducibly score at the same level, and they're not good defensively. Typically, Final Four teams are top 25 offensively and defensively. And I think they can get away with it because Shaka's a very good tactician on the defensive side of the ball, and he's proven to be very good offensively as well. Marquette is 62nd in defense, according to Ken Pong. And if you're not top 30, it's very difficult to make it that far. This year, I think there's more possibility of it. I think Marquette's the type of team that can make an Elite Eight. I think that's their ceiling. I would love them to make a Final Four and make me look really smart for my group chat. But I just think that Oso is a very good big in college basketball, but he's not a true center. And so they're susceptible on the glass at times. And I think that teams that make Tyler Kolek be a scorer rather than a facilitator have an advantage there, and because they're not physically imposing Marquette. And there's ways to mitigate that if you're physically imposing in your backcourt. Their guards are not big. They're very good offensively. And so I think it's just, like I said about Iowa State, it's too hard to rely on one side of the ball too much. It's the opposite side of the ball for Marquette. I buy Marquette more as a contender than I do Iowa State. But I just don't see them making a Final Four. I could see them making an Elite Eight, and I likely will be guilty of picking them far because I really like the way they play. And it's like Xavier. Xavier and Marquette are very similar to me. And Marquette was better only because Zach Fremantle got hurt.
Right.
And you can make the argument that they should have beaten Xavier just a couple days ago. Or, sorry, the opposite. But you win. You win and you survive. But it's hard to do so against teams 6 times in a row when you're so much better on one side of the ball than you are the other.
Absolutely. Well, I want to move on to talk about Creighton here real quick as well. A season of streaks for the Blue Jays. They had that 6-game losing streak earlier in the year with Kalkbrenner being injured, sick. He was out for a while. They then had an 8-game winning streak in Big East play, kind of put them back on the map. Now they've lost 2 out of their last 3. This very narrow loss to Marquette. They had a loss to Providence last week and then one on the road against St. John's. Creighton has been a bit of an inconsistent team, as we kind of talked about, but with Ryan Nembhard, with Ryan Kalkbrenner, really, really talented team. I'm curious, I'm guessing this loss probably doesn't move the needle too much for you, for Creighton in general. They've always kind of struck me as a team that every time I see them on the 5 line or the 6 line of NCAA tournament brackets, I'm like, man, I would not want to face that team in that situation. I'm curious if you think this team has the horses to make a deep run. You kind of mentioned the Big East. Not sure how many teams can do it. Where does kind of Creighton fall in that conversation?
I typically go into March Madness and don't trust Creighton. Like, that's my rule of thumb. However, I actually like this team. I think their starters are as good as anywhere in the country. The issue is their bench is such a step backwards. So I think it's too hard for them to advance far. But I do think this team is like a team that, if they're playing well, is really to be reckoned with. Their defense is far, far better than any Creighton team's been in years past. Last year's defense was pretty good as well. But in years prior, they were all run and gun, shoot threes. And if you're in Omaha, it ends up being a tough night for you. But typically, you can wear them down. I think Creighton, UConn, and Providence play the most sustainable basketball because they're kind of equal in offense and defense, or close to it. And Marquette and Xavier are beautiful offensive teams, but they have to work harder to get those wins because they're going to give up points. So Creighton, if they're a 5, I think they're a Sweet 16 team, depending matchup. If there's a team that can get Kalkbrenner in trouble, they're really in trouble. I think they have a huge step backwards, and he's their most vital player. But I just don't trust a team that plays 5 players so much. Like, if one of them gets hurt, if one of them, particularly Kalkbrenner, gets in foul trouble, how does Creighton evolve and really adapt to playing a different style? So I don't buy them as a true contender, but I certainly buy them as a dangerous team.
Well, closing out the show, as we often do when Leaf is here, we talk upset watch, take a look at some ranked teams that may end up losing to some unranked teams, help you all out with your FanDuel accounts for people who want to do some sports betting this weekend. Leaf, I know we talked offline about some of the games we discussed for upset watch. Had a lot of similar games on our radars, not surprising here. I'm going to start talking about another Big East team that I think could potentially suffer an upset here. This is Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time for anybody who wants to tune in. Xavier is playing on the road at Seton Hall. Xavier has now lost 3 of their last 4 games. They lost at Butler. They lost against Nova. Butler's a pretty rough loss. Nova is a really challenging team right now, but obviously a team capable of beating anybody in the Big East. Musketeers have been without Zach Fremantle. They're only 5-4 on the road. Meanwhile, Seton Hall has done a very good job of defending their home court, 10-4 at home for them. It was a 3-point game the last time these two teams played. And for me, I feel like Xavier's kind of in a precarious spot right now. They're a better team. I believe that, but I think Seton Hall and the Pirates could pull a victory here and potentially kind of make the muddy the waters a little bit more in the Big East standings as we get closer and closer to the Big East tournament and, of course, March Madness.
Yeah, I like that one. That was one I considered as well. One that I don't know if it's a huge upset. It's an interstate rivalry of sorts. Illinois and Northwestern. Northwestern, outside of Purdue, you could argue has been the most consistent team in the Big Ten. They're getting their flowers now after a recent hot streak. But I'll take the Illini at home. I honestly thought they played very well without Terrence Shannon Jr. It could have been a case of addition by subtraction. They kind of almost blew that. I would say that they were the better team against Indiana. They just lost their composure late and went cold. I don't know if it's sustainable without Terrence Shannon Jr., but I really liked the way they played without him. I think they're going to get a win over Northwestern, and I think a guy like Seton Harris can really be disruptive against Boo Buie.
Yeah, I had that one on my list as well. Like I said, similar notes here from both of us on some potential upsets this weekend. The next one that I want to talk about, game on Saturday morning, West Coast, Saturday afternoon, East Coast, 9 a.m. and noon on the East Coast. That is Texas Christian, TCU, on the road in Lubbock against Texas Tech. TCU's only 3-6 on the road, and they are in free fall right now. They have lost 5 of their last 6. Their only win in that stretch against Oklahoma State. Again, not really any bad losses in the Big 12. Their other losses, they also had a loss to Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Baylor, Iowa State, and Kansas in that stretch. Meanwhile, Texas Tech, they're on a nice little 4-game winning streak. They started the season out in a really, really bad spot in Big 12 conference play, have kind of rebounded since then. Getting Daz Amack back has helped them. Devion Harmon has stepped up in a big way for this team. They have wins in this 4-game winning streak over Kansas State and Texas. They are 11-4 at home. Also a top 50 defense in the country per KenPom. Meanwhile, TCU is among the worst offensive teams in the conference. Still a decent offensive team, 60th in the country, but in the Big 12, that's not all that good. I think Tech has a pretty good chance of stealing another nice win here and kind of furthering the fall that we have seen from TCU over the last couple weeks.
Yeah, that's one I wrote down. I think TCU is going to be better now with Mike Miles back.
Yep.
They didn't look great against Kansas, but they still played Kansas very tight on their home floor. Mm-hmm. I've got a couple written down here, but I have a question about Texas Tech. What do they have to do to make the tournament? Do they have to win the Big 12 tournament?
I think if they win a couple games in the Big 12 tournament, that they have a chance. But if I was the coaching staff there, I'd tell your guys, hey, we got to win this whole dang thing because we don't want to leave it up to the committee. That losing streak to start Big 12 play was really, really rough on them. I know that the committee tends to look at injury situations and getting guys back and kind of being in a better spot towards the end of the year. It could help, but I think that this team probably did enough damage to their resume early in the year that it's going to be really, really hard to climb back up into it. But if they win a few games in the Big 12 tournament, I think there's a chance.
Yeah, I'm of a similar mind. I just wonder if they can win 3 of their next 4, which is feasible, but not easy, that they'd have a chance. So I'll glaze over a couple of these. There's a lot that I think are possible. Mississippi State's a team that I think needs a big win. They're playing at home after losing an overtime game recently. Against Missouri. They're playing against Texas A&M, who's really playing well, but isn't a world beater. They're a defensively oriented team, just like Mississippi State. So expect a close one in that one. And now 2 teams that are perennial powers that desperately need a win is what I'm banking on here. And that's North Carolina, who has no quad 1 wins, 0-9, desperately need a win. And Virginia comes to town, who hasn't been playing very good basketball recently. They've won all their games, but have dropped 12 spots in the KenPom rankings. And then the next one is Villanova. They got their biggest, most marquee win. They play Creighton. They're hosting them. I don't love this one. I feel less confident about this. But Villanova's playing better basketball. Creighton, if they'd beaten Marquette, maybe I could see them having a little letdown. I think they're going to be looking for a little revenge as well. And then the last one would be Arkansas and Bama. Should Bama have a little bit of a, I don't know if I want to call it hangover, but just the lasting effects from this news that's breaking. Should Brandon Miller be out? Should all these different things happen? Jaden Bradley too, who's oddly remained pretty anonymous in this. Yeah, I just think Arkansas's got the talent that they could play a team like Bama close.
Absolutely, I think that's an interesting one, a game that I'm going to be paying close attention to. I mentioned Alabama being at home, I think, helps them a little bit in that situation, but it's going to be kind of an interesting story to see how Alabama kind of rebounds from this and how they play going forward. And of course, as we talked about in the first segment, what it means for Oats and Miller and Bradley, for that matter, in terms of their playing time and whether they serve any suspensions or anything like that. For now, we assume that they are going to continue on as they have been. All right, that is going to do it for us today. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube if you haven't done so yet. Go to youtube.com, search Locked On College Basketball, hit that big red subscribe button. We are available wherever you get podcasts, also on YouTube. Leave a comment, hit that like button, leave us a review on iTunes, all of that good stuff. I want to thank all of you for listening, and until next time, peace out.